Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 11th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about bullying in the workplace for Anti-Bullying Week, which takes place from the 11th to the 15th of November. I'm going to be talking about bullying in the workplace, how to spot it if you're being bullied, what you can do about it at both an individual and an organisational level. And I was very honoured to be a panel speaker at the Ben Cohen Foundation's Bullying in the Workplace conference, Empowering the Individual, on Monday, the 11th of November. And I've written a specific blog about this if you want to catch up about what happened at the conference. This year's theme for Anti-Bullying Week is Change Starts With Us. And I have to say, it takes a collective responsibility to stop bullying, and everyone has a part to play. But first of all, let's look at some terminology. Often the words bullying and harassment are used together, but actually, how is bullying defined? Well, interestingly, there's no technical legal definition, but there is a working definition that everyone understands, and by everyone I mean legal, HR, and relevant professions understand what bullying is. And that is defined as persistent, offensive, abusive, intimidating, malicious, or insulting behaviour which amounts to an abuse of power and makes the recipient feel upset, threatened, humiliated, or vulnerable. Bullying undermines a target's self-confidence and may cause them to suffer stress. So what about harassment? Is harassment the same as bullying? Or is it different? Well, interestingly, there is a legal definition of harassment, and it comes in the Equality Act 2010. And harassment, yes, it's very similar behaviour to bullying. However, harassment has to be based on one of the protected characteristics, and that is age, disability, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, including ethnicity, nationality, and potentially caste, religion and belief, pregnancy or maternity, civil partnership, marital status. Often harassment does happen as a one-off. With bullying, it could happen as a one-off, but to show that you've been bullied, one often has to show the persistent behaviour. But of course, one incident of inappropriate touching, for example, based on gender would be harassment. So in law, harassment is unwelcome behaviour which creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment or violates another's dignity along the lines of the protected characteristics. Oh, but wait a second, there's another word, isn't there? Victimisation. So what's victimisation all about? And victimisation is treating someone badly because they've made a claim or complaint or of discrimination, or because you believe, or one might believe, that a person has or will make a complaint of discrimination. Then they get bullied and harassed even further. And I think it's important to tease these out, because bullying, harassment, victimisation are often used together, but there are nuances and differences in what they mean. But bullying has many faces, unfortunately, and here are just a few examples of the type of bullying that can take place. So corporate bullying, that's where an employer abuses an employee's impunity, knowing that they're unlikely to take action for fear of losing their job and finding another one. Institutional bullying, that's where bullying is entrenched in the culture of an organisation, especially at senior levels. Legal bullying, bringing a vexatious or malicious claim against an individual to punish a person. Pressure bullying, being forced to work to unrealistic timescales and or without inadequate resources. And often people laugh at that because it feels like many people work in environments like that, and that has, in some ways, become the norm. Regulation bullying, where a bully forces their target to comply with rules, regulations, procedures, or policies, regardless of their appropriateness, acceptability, or necessity. Residual bullying. After a serial bully has left, the behaviours and its effects linger in an organisation, potentially going on for years. Cyberbullying, the use of the internet, social media to spread rumours, misinformation, with the aim of humiliating and damaging a person's reputation. organisational bullying. This often occurs as a result of cuts, reduced income, or changing markets or other extreme pressures. It's a combination of corporate and pressure bullying, unrealistic workload, time pressures, and resources, combined with the fact that employees are unlikely to take any action, usually more of an organisational culture. And there are other examples too, but I would be here all day if I went into all of them. But as we can see, bullying has many faces and many systemic ways of appearing. Now, it's vital that everyone cares about bullying, because why do we want to work in an environment where this degrading, hostile, and intimidating environment and behaviours undermine, intimidate, and threaten someone, cutting their inclusion in the workplace, talent, and progression? And a 2015 poll carried out by YouGov for the TUC revealed that nearly a third of people are bullied at work. Women are more likely to be victims of bullying than men. The highest prevalence of workplace bullying is actually amongst 40 to 59-year-olds, well, at least in 2015 when the survey was carried out, where 34% of adults are affected. And nearly a third of Asian employees or those from other BAME backgrounds reported experiencing some form of bullying or harassment, compared with 18% of white employees. And then there's the costs. So the costs of bullying are thought to be between 17.7 and 20 billion, no, that's right, billion per year, although it's difficult to estimate. But take into consideration grievance cases, sickness absence, and recruiting new staff, and you can see, with nothing being done to really tackle bullying, that these costs would just keep going up and up and up. Sadly, workplaces and teams torn apart by bullying are torn apart by bullying, and it doesn't seem to get better without acknowledgement of the system that it takes place in and creating systemic change. People leave people, they don't actually leave jobs, generally. So being bullied, not being able to progress, results in an erosion of confidence. Teams are not able to move forward, there's permanent damage, and in the worst case scenarios, and unfortunately there are far too many that happen each year, we see members of staff taking their own life and completing suicide. And I'd like to share a little bit about my experience of workplace bullying. Bullying has been one of the key parts, unfortunately, in my life, but it has led me to do what I do in terms of inclusion and talking about mental health and well-being. Last year, I featured on the inspirational Petra Velsaboa's Advantage to Adversity podcast, where I spoke about my experience of workplace bullying and burnout. And actually, this was the first time I'd talked about it in a public arena, and it wasn't easy for me to talk about what happened, as it was a really painful time. It was during my time working at the University of Oxford, where I'd worked hard for 5+ years building a name for myself in a tough environment, and I experienced umpteen incidents of microaggressions, and God knows what was said behind my back, but quite frankly, in this case, ignorance is bliss. The interesting thing was the manager that came into the department had previously been a colleague working in a different area of the university, and I was actually really pleased when she was hired to managing our fluctuating area. Very slowly but surely, though, she turned on me. She stopped me from carrying out valuable work by delegating projects to others without my knowledge. She prevented me from liaising with staff networks, doing race equality work, a key part of my role, and visiting colleges to talk about race equity and how they could improve what they do. And it's dawned on me now just how bad it was. There were times when I'd get up in the morning and be in floods of tears and not want to go to work. And when I look back, I realised I was not at my mental optimum, and I'd actually become quite mentally unwell. And I had the classic symptoms of feeling very anxious about what she would say to me, do next, to undermine me. And yes, she was a micromanager, and I appreciate now that comes from fear. And the irony is, 5 years later, she was pushed out the organisation by the most senior person. And what I would say is karma does win, but it takes time. However, we shouldn't just accept that, and bullying needs to be challenged. As I mentioned, I can see now, due to her lack of knowledge and expertise, she did not have the emotional intelligence to articulate how she felt, and there was clearly a huge amount of white fragility there that, for whatever reason, made her feel vulnerable. It doesn't excuse the behaviour, but it does enable me to understand her need for control and the fact that she felt very threatened for whatever reason by me. And like I said, I would never want to relive that experience again, but it does enable me to connect with people and understand what they're going through. So, what can you do? We know that bullying is a problem. What can organisations and managers and individuals do about bullying? The first thing I would say is please, whatever you do, do not dismiss laughing, joking, negative comments as banter. It's not okay. Now, clearly, in friendship groups, there will be banter, but that's a different space. And maybe some people don't find banter offensive, but other people will. And even if the banter's not directed at them, it doesn't create a positive work environment, and quite frankly, it's not professional. If you see someone at the end of bullying, whether that's withholding of information, receiving a snotty email, not being invited to meetings, ask them how they are, ask them if they're okay, and ask them if there's anything that you can do to help them. The other key thing is to train staff, all staff, where possible, although mandatory training, I need to do a separate podcast on that, is a different story, but on how to be an active bystander. Now, an active bystander culture means that everyone recognises and takes action for their own behaviour, and when they see negative behaviour, they'll be in a better situation to call it out. So an example would be, if you see someone in trouble, assess for safety and ask yourself if you can help in any way. But you do have to remember that your personal safety is a priority and not to put yourself at risk. Then the B is be in a group. If it's safer to call out behaviour or intervene in a group, then absolutely do that. If it's not an option, report to others who can. And talk to the person, as I mentioned before, who might not seem okay. And they're what is called the 4 Ds of active bystanding. And just building a little bit more on what I said, the first D is for direct. So if you can call out the negative behaviours, let's say someone makes an inappropriate joke in a meeting, you would simply say something like, and I think perhaps managers in hierarchical organisations may find this easier than peers, "We don't tolerate jokes like that here, please stop, and I don't wish that to be repeated again." Another option is that you can delay. So if the situation, you want time to think about it, or you want to process what the best course of action might be once it's happened, you can take a step back, walk away, wait for the situation to pass, talk to the victim and report it when it's safe or when you've decided the best way to do that. And it doesn't matter whether it's a week later or a year later, it's still important. You still have the options to report going forward. The other technique is to distract. So let's say someone is shouting at someone, or you can see they're not going to invite them to a meeting, is to take the heat out of the situation and distract one of the people. So it could be, I just need to talk to so-and-so for a minute. Or if to the person perpetrating, if you have a good relationship with them, you could say, there's a phone call for you. There's something I need to ask you, and just take the heat out of that situation. And finally, there's delegation. So escalating or informing a more senior member of staff, and it's different to delay because you do it as soon as possible, to someone who has authority and can do it and can potentially do something about it quickly. Please make processes simple and try and not make the onus for reporting bullying solely on the individual. I appreciate that someone will have to report it and explain how they've what they've experienced, but simple processes can really be a key. Often, bullying doesn't get reported because the processes and the grievance flowcharts are just far too convoluted. 5. Realise the impact on someone's mental health and well-being. So make sure they've got the support they need, if they need time out, if they need to go speak to the employee assistance program, whatever it is, do not underestimate the impact on someone's mental health. And yes, for a period of time, their performance may go down because they're under severe stress and they don't feel like themselves and their confidence is eroded. And then number 6, and of course this isn't in any particular order, stop the bullying by having zero tolerance. And I mean zero tolerance. If there's a serial bully and there's negative culture going on and there's an investigation, get that person out of the organisation. But rarely does this happen. In fact, often what I've seen is bullies get a promotion. And I don't know why this happens, or they get moved to another department where they become senior. And this is particularly a problem in academic environments where often bullies bring in huge amounts of grant money and they're very well known on international circles, and they're important people. And also the use of non-disclosure agreements then means that no one is able to speak out about the bullying from these very powerful people who bring in significant amounts of funding. However, there does need to be a zero tolerance culture, and by setting an example, it does mean people are less likely to do this. And if the bullying is coming from management level, this does make things more difficult for other co-workers, as they'll be extremely worried that they would also become targets. But encouraging staff to speak out against bullying can be really helpful, as there'll normally be more than one victim, and power in numbers is helpful, as we've seen with the growing Me Too movement. Even though the active bystander technique we could attribute to delay, it's been incredibly powerful, but there have been an inordinate number of people that have gotten away with sexual harassment, abuse and bullying. But having a zero tolerance policy and procedure and way of working on bullying in the workplace and making this known is very important, as it will make your staff feel secure within their working environment, and making processes simple will mean that they'll know how to report things if they are being bullied. And I think there's no end to benefits if we can solve some of this or do it better. There's more awareness about bullying behaviours, people are more likely to be called out, they're likely to understand how to report it, and there'll be fewer grievances that result in long-term sick leave, and those figures of between 17.7 and 20 billion are likely to be reduced. So it might seem like another tick box, oh, here we go, anti-bullying training, but if it's done well and people can have a proper processes, clear processes and discussion about this, there's absolutely nothing to stop a positive culture from prevailing and being the norm. I so hope you found this episode useful, and it'd be brilliant if you could get involved with Anti-Bullying Week by using the hashtag on social media, Anti-Bullying Week, hashtag also Odd Socks, that's particularly popular in schools, and the hashtag Change Starts With Us. I've also included some links for bullying at work in the workplace and the TUC report. And also remember that ACAS, which I've included on the links, is a really useful guide where there's lots of information about challenging bullying and how you can access their helpline, because change does start with us and it's everyone's responsibility to stop bullying. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.